I'm Boone Powell, and I grew up in San Antonio, but I was born in Houston in 1933. Well, my father started a business here in 1939 and we came as a family here. Everybody was in Houston before air conditioning, and nobody was very healthy, and San Antonio was just a wonderful place for us. We came to San Antonio because there was an offer from my mother's side of the family of someone who was in the laundry and dry cleaning business and owned a series of stores, and he said to my dad, "Why don't you come to San Antonio and work with me, and I'll train you in another business." So that's what he did. He accepted that. He came here and founded Powell Quality Cleaners, and it did quite well eventually. I was about 5 or 4.5 when I came to San Antonio. We never had shoes on in the summer, and the streets were always extremely hot, and you ran across an asphalt street as fast as you could. And then you just hoped that when you got to the other side, there weren't grass burrs. But it was a good place to grow up. We had some freedom because we were in a little smaller city than Houston. So our parents weren't really worried about it. We would walk down to the railroad tracks. If we got unhappy with our folks, we would walk down the railroad tracks and walk out the railroad tracks and run away, but then we would soon come back. When I was about 4 or 5, my mother bought a book for me, and I was still in Houston, that showed pictures of bridges and told stories about bridges. And I just fell in love with bridges. And so for years I thought, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to be a bridge engineer. When I got into 7th grade at Mark Twain, Miss Powers was the teacher, and I was okay at math. I knew that, but I realized after a while that I wasn't going to ever be a whiz at mathematics, and so I was be an A student or something like that, but it wasn't easy. It wasn't really easy, and I knew that I could never be a really good bridge engineer, creative bridge engineer, unless I was better at math. And I was talking to myself, as I often do, talking to myself about it when the thought occurred to me, because she was doing some theorem on the board and I was sort of following it. And I said, you know, I can't be a bridge engineer. I'll have to be an architect. I never ever questioned that in any way whatsoever. That was the final decision made in 7B. So that's how it happened. I was at Twain. I went to Jefferson. Then I went to SAC for a year because I wanted to play basketball for them, and wasn't really a very good situation. I had 3 serious injuries, sort of. And so at that, I said, well, look, I'm going to stop fooling around and I'm going to study. And I did, and I did well. And then after that, I went to UT from SAC, finished in 4 years because it's a 5-year program, and went in the Army, and then met O'Neill and Sam Zisman in that office. And not Neil's office, but Sam was an independent person and planner. And they both convinced me. I had come to the office just for 1 month before I was drafted. And they convinced me that with what I said before I got drafted, but I'd already graduated, and I'd worked in Chicago for 5.5 months or something like that. Then I came back to San Antonio to be drafted, and the draft board said, well, they didn't want me. Not that month, but next month it'd be fine. They'd take me next month. So I didn't have anything to do for a month. And so I went to my old employer I'd worked with for 3 summers. And he said, well, look, I don't have any work extra right now. I can't really hire you, but I'll call any. I know most of the architects in San Antonio. I'll call them. And anybody you want me to, who would you like? And I didn't have an idea. And I said, well, O'Neill Ford. It's someone I had heard speak in UT, and so his name came to mind. And also, he was well known, and so Charlie said, "Yeah, well, I'll call him. I know Neil." So the deal was almost completed right on the phone. I mean, Neil likes unusual things, and he always, this was really good. He was going to have this person for a month, and then they're going to go away. So anyway, that's how I got my job. I went over to see him that afternoon, and he was ready to put me to work that day. So anyway, that's how I got to Ford Powell and Carson. Then a little less than a month later, I was drafted and went to Fort Bliss and then Fort Hood, and was trained as a combat engineer. Well, I was going to be in for 2 years in the military, but there was a provision that if you were going to miss a whole year of school if you didn't register in time, and you only needed about 2 months or 3 months situation, then they would let you out early. So I took advantage of that provision and came back to the United States, spent a couple of days here at home packing and everything, and then went right on to Boston, to MIT. The MIT program was 2 years in planning. I was taking city planning, city and regional planning, because I was interested in the way things fit together. What was really interesting to me was how to make a great city with great architecture, of course, because I was primarily an architect, but I really wanted to be inspired by some of the things I'd seen in Europe, how cities worked out together. Now, I'd seen the European cities in a summer of 1955, and there was still a lot of wreckage from the war that hadn't been rebuilt. So I didn't see them in all their glory that I saw later. But I went and spent the summer there in 1955 in Europe, and we traveled, another architecture student myself, traveled all over Europe that summer. Neil and Sam Zisman, who was a planner, had sent me there and written letters for me and wanted and encouraged me to go. And I had the job already lined up because they wanted me to come back and work for them here in San Antonio. I worked on something that was being done by Heine Muller, who was an ex-second baseman or shortstop for the St. Louis Cardinals and an all-star in the 30s. And he was redoing Ocon's Corner on Vita Street in Alamo, the corner of there. The building is still there. It's a very old building the Conservation Society owned. And the press club was in it, in the basement. We all gathered there because it was a place you could get mixed drinks. And I say we all, I wasn't all that into mixed drinks, but I mean others did. And after that, Heine bought it. And I did the work for it, worked with him on it, and that was really my first major job. After that, there were a variety of things. Some things that had to do with the North Expressway, which we were opposed to. Other things that had to do with Conservation Society work in other ways, and then they sent me off to Arkansas. My wife was a planner from Harvard, and so we went to Little Rock on a loan to program and photograph and help write the bill to fund a new mental hospital for the state of Arkansas. The project I really enjoyed more was the Paseo del Alamo, the linking of the Alamo Plaza to the river, because there was a feeling that people, and it's pretty well substantiated, but people didn't know how to get from one to the other. And for some reason, they didn't. So the idea was to link them. And so that linkage through the Hyatt Hotel was my job. I also worked on the Hyatt Hotel, but in a less, in not the primary position. That was Thompson, Fitzgerald, and Steinbach in Atlanta. And where they were prime architects on the hotel, we did the first floor and the area down there where the waterway is. And that was just great because we archaeologically we went in and found the old footings, we found the old walls, we found bullets and helmets and things from the past, from the time of the revolution actually, Battle of the Alamo. And then I got to tell a story that I really wanted to tell, and that was what the Spanish found here, and it got to express that in a kind of a metaphor that there was the springs along the San Antonio River that created the water, that it was a situation of damming up the river, which they did, and diverting the water into the acequias, and having the acequias water the gardens, and this became the most successful of all the Spanish settlements in Texas because of the water and because of the fact that the land was shaped in such a way as to allow the water to go out into acequias and gain ground over the river, so that you could irrigate what was between the acequia and the river. In most of the rivers, they are cut more deeply. The Colorado or the Guadalupe are cut more deeply in the ground, and you can't do that. You can't. The San Antonio River was uniquely advantageous in terms of the way it could be manipulated to irrigate land. And so it then became very successful. That was the story we told with the way the river is done there. We got that job in 2001, and I think we finished most of the work in 2009. So it took 8 years. We were held up a little while because of some political things. That the city was a little worried about starting the North Reach before they started the South Reach, because they felt that, and truthfully, that the South always thought that they were being put behind and they were second class. And so for about a year and a half we were held up, but because of that, well, the money was deteriorating because of inflation and all. So they finally decided they couldn't wait any longer, and so we started a little ahead of the South Reach. Well, I think the critical thing was coming up with the idea of using the walkway in such a way that it was part of a metaphor about how the Spanish settled the land and how they irrigated the crops using the river. And we told that story. The water came out of a series of little rivulets and began to run down and got into pools, and then the pool was carried across in an aqueduct across the walkway, while the water ran across in the aqueduct was like the water in the acequia, and the main body of water that ran underneath all that was the San Antonio River. So it was a playful kind of game back and forth between the two of them, and in several parts of it, we made channels that simulated the acequias themselves. Well, there needed to be some kind of a theme building for the World's Fair. There were a number of ideas. Most of them weren't particularly appropriate. And finally the decision was made it ought to be a tower, because the tower could be funded. That was critical. I mean, most of the things that you do, if you did anything of any substantial size or cost, and it didn't have a generator of funds, we wouldn't have been able to afford it. There wasn't that kind of money. So finally, for the reason of previous successes doing that, the Seattle World's Fair was one of the primary sources of that feedback that we got, we decided that there ought to be a tower. And I say we, the we in this case is the board of the fair. And I was kind of skeptical about a tower, and Neil was sort of skeptical about a tower. Well, we were going to do that. But as I visited a couple, as we went to Seattle and went up in the tower, and a couple of other people in the firm, not Neil. Then we went back to San Francisco and looked at some things there, some towers that were actually just on tops of tall buildings. They were restaurants and so on. As we realized that this was probably a pretty smart idea. This is probably the right idea. And there were a lot of, way too much material to talk about right here in terms of our limitation in time. But as we went along, we became more and more convinced. But it was a very difficult process. Lots of things almost stopped it. The primary jeopardy of the tower really was the lack of funds. That we had the tower committee of the Hemisphere itself, of the Hemisphere Corporation, was able to put up about $60,000 for working on the tower plans. A full fee for that would have been about $275,000. So they were quite limited. And so our plans were only partly done. And there's not enough supplementary money, for instance, to even do a wind tunnel test, which was necessary. So that was a kind of a problem that we had. We finally overcame that. We got bids. Henry Gonzalez worried a little bit about there's only one bidder. There was only one bidder, and so he demanded really that it be rebid. That was actually a good thing, because the contractor who had bid, was a member of the board of the fair, and there was the image of conflict of interest. Not only that, he couldn't have built it because he didn't have the kind of crews it took. And so he was lucky. It saved his business in all likelihood. And we rebid it, and Light a Lot, a combine of a local contractor and a Houston contractor that had the moxie involved, needed, got the bid. That was one very close call. We got the money. We started trying to finish the working drawings. We still had a long ways to go. But there was a woman out in South San Antonio, can't remember her name, but she was threatening to file a lawsuit about the tower. And it wasn't that it was valid, but the fact of it was, if even an injunction that would stopped us for a while in court would have meant that we couldn't get the tower finished in time for the fair, and therefore wouldn't really be able to fund it. And so the city, and we were the architects, but we didn't know what was going on because this was private to the city. The city decided to sign the contract with Light a Lot without us knowing it, and started in the middle of the night, because she hadn't filed her suit yet. And if she filed it after it was started, after the tower was started, she would have to post a bond for the total amount. She couldn't possibly do that. And so the city realized that she was substantially not able to, to do that kind of thing. So I woke up one morning and found out that the tower was under construction. We didn't have plans finished. We didn't even know what the steel was going to be right near the ground. And we had not done the wind tunnel test. The city now could afford it and was now going to authorize for us. So that was the other really dramatic thing. While the tower was being built, I would wake up in the middle of the night and start thinking about all the things that had to be done first thing in the morning, or we'd really be behind in some serious ways. And so I would keep a little yellow pad and I'd write 10 things down and then go back to sleep. And that's about the only way I could sleep, is just to get them down on paper, because if you lay there and thought about them, you just finally never get to sleep. We finished the tower really the day before the fair. The word I heard recently, somebody said, oh, they opened the fair, they opened the tower a week or two later, and that's not true. What did happen is that Martin Luther King was assassinated the day before the fair was to open. And I think it was the day before or 2 days before, whatever it was. There were some meetings by the fair with the city. They decided they needed to put off opening the tower and they put it off for 1 day. And there was no problems around the country apparently, so they thought, well, we'll go ahead and do it. So they opened the fair, and it was ready to operate. But before that, even there were significant problems that could have stopped the tower. One that was the most dangerous, or critical, I should say, rather than dangerous. One that was the most critical was the fact that the lifting rods that were going to pick up the top house, which had been constructed at ground level, was going to pick up the top house and lift it to the top and then cement it back in place. And those lifting rods started failing. And there were 24 of them, and in one area, there about 7 or 8 broke. And the top house was kind of tilted and was in critical shape, and one rod they later estimated was holding its actual total maximum strength of 170,000 pounds. And had it failed, then the tower would never have been built. And so the contractors got cranes in from around the state, overland cranes that came in. They hooked into the top house. It was at ground level after all, and although it's 7 stories tall, they hooked into it and got hold of it. That gave the workers confidence that they could walk under it. And they walked under it, and we used 10-inch steel pipes to prop up the tower at that point, while they discovered the situation and then decided what they were going to do about it. And in brief, what they decided to do about it was really smart. They fell back on tradition, and what they decided to use to lift the tower was oil field drill stem pipe, because it took the torque. It went down 15,000 feet, was able to stand the twisting. It was in 30-foot intervals, so that as you jacked it up, that 30 foot of the pipe would come off the top. You take that off and drop it down to the ground and keep on going. And we lifted the tower that way. I say we, the contractors lifted it, because it was their job, not our job, to deal with that kind of situation. Perfect solution, though. All of them sued each other. The lift slab people sued, and Bethlehem Steel sued, and Elida Lot sued, and the judge finally said, "I just can't make this out." Says, "I think you're all innocent and all guilty." And so, there was no decision made that I know of where any money was exchanged in any way. It just was one of those things. Everybody was implicit, and everybody was doing the best they could. While I was passionate about it, I really wanted to be. After the 7th grade, I decided I had to be an architect. And I'd never decided I was going to be insignificant. I was going to do things that were good things. That's what I wanted to do. And if it couldn't be bridges, I finally have done bridges. I did about 25 bridges eventually, and working with with engineers in all cases. And there are 6 or 7 of them here in San Antonio, and so basically it's working on things you really are interested in and that you love the idea of. And I worked on college campuses and college buildings and bridges and waterways like the river and fountains and all that. And I think that the key thing about it is that your heart and soul's in it. You know, you really want to do it. You really want to do something wonderful that people love. Well, the toughest project was the state capitol. And we restored the state capitol between 1989 and 1996. It's very hard to redo a capitol building, a major capitol building, displace all the state senators and representatives, move them all, and wind that with funding.